Hello, my name is Alison Hernandez Zapata. I'm an exchange student from Mexico, majoring in business administration with emphasis in marketing, and today I'm going to talk about international trade law. Hope you enjoy it.
Trade between nations and the link between trade and economic growth are neither recent nor novel developments, and all these were widely realized and exploited. This came about through globalization, which led to a global economy. The concept of economic globalization has been popular around the world for more than a decade. Thomas Friedman defined globalization as the inexorable integration of markets, nation-states, and technologies to a degree never witnessed before, in a way that is enabling individuals, corporations, and nation-states to reach around the world farther, faster, deeper, and cheaper than ever before. While the trend towards globalization is clear, the extent of today's global economy integration can be exaggerated. International trade should normally force high-cost domestic producers to lower their prices and bring the prices of products and services between different countries closer together. However, large differences in prices persist. What drives economic globalization? It is commonly argued that two main forces have driven that economic globalization. In first place, we have the technology. This force makes globalization feasible. Technological innovations have resulted in dramatic fall in transportation, communication, and computing costs. The natural barriers of time and space that separate national markets have been coming down. The second force is the liberalization of trade and foreign direct investment. This is what makes this happen. Most developed countries have gradually but significantly lowered barriers to foreign trade and allowed free movement of capital. To fill all the gaps in this global economy, we need international treaties between the countries. An international trade is the exchange of goods and services between countries, and it allows to expand the markets of goods and services that otherwise may not have been available for us. This type of trade gives rise to the world economy. Most economists agree that countries can benefit from international trade. An example of this is Adam Smith, who wrote in his classic book The Wealth of Nations that if a foreign country can supply us with a commodity cheaper than we ourselves can make, it better buy from them with some part of the produce of our own industry, employed in a way in which we have some advantage. Generally, international trade brings growth to global economy, but this agreement has its advantages and disadvantages, and for those disadvantages, countries actively intervene in international trade by adopting trade restrictive measures. A prime reason for a country to take trade restrictive measures is to protect a domestic industry and employment in that industry from competition arising from imported products or commercial services. We can find an example of this in the Adjusting to Trade Liberalization of the World Trade Organization. It indicates that in the US, for instance, 45,000 steel workers have lost their job since 1997, and 30% of the country's steel-making capacity has filed for bankruptcy since 1998, while steel imports were on the rise. Now, I'm going to talk about of the law on international trades. As we discussed, economic globalization and international trade need to be properly managed so it can be a benefit. Peter Sutherland, the World Trade Organization Director General, argued that the greatest economic challenge facing the world is the need to create an international system that not only maximizes global growth but also achieves a greater measure of equity. The most important means available to secure peace and prosperity into the future and develop effective multilateral approaches and institutions. All this supported by the ideas of Ronald Coase, who also argued that it is evident that, for their operation, markets require the establishment of legal rules governing the rights and duties of those carrying out transactions. To realize all the gains of trade, there has to be a legal system and political order. And why is there a need for international trade rules? First, countries must be restrained from adopting trade restrictive measures both in their own interest and in that of the world economy. Second, the need of traders and investors for a degree of security and predictability. Traders and investors operating or intending to operate in a country that is bound by such legal rules will be able to predict better how that country will act in the future matters affecting their operations in that country. Also, national governments alone simply can't cope with the challenges presented by economic globalization. And the last reason is the need to achieve a greater measure of equity in international economic relations. Now, what is international economic law? International economic law can be defined as covering all those international rules pertaining to economic transactions and relations, as well as those pertaining to governmental regulation of economic matters. The international economic law includes international rules on trade in goods and services, economic development, international property rights, foreign direct investment, international finance and monetary matters, commodities, food, health, transportation, communication, natural resources, and others. International trade law consists, on one hand, of numerous bilateral or regional trade agreements, and on the other hand, multilateral trade agreements. The North American Free Trade Agreement and the Mercosur Agreement are typical examples of regional trades. The trade agreement between the United States and Israel, or the agreement on trade on one between the European Community and Australia, are examples of bilateral trade agreements. And the most important and broadest of all multilateral trade agreements is the Marrakesh Agreement establishing the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization is complex and specialized, deals with broad spectrum of issues, ranging from tariffs, import quotas, and customs formalities to intellectual property rights, food safety regulations, and national security measures. The World Trade Organization has 6 groups of basic rules and principles. In the first place, we have the principles of non-discrimination. The 2 principles are the most favored nation treatment obligation and the nation treatment obligation. The second is the rules on market access, including rules on transparency. These are rules such as custom duties, other duties and financial charges, quantitative restrictions, and other non-tariff barriers. The third is the rules on unfair trade. This refers to a relatively detailed, highly technical and complex rules that relate to specific forms of unfair trade. The fourth talks about the rules on conflicts between trade liberalization and other societal values and interests. These allow the World Trade Organization members to take account of economic and non-economic values and interests that compete or conflict with free trade. The fifth is about the rules on special on differential treatment from developing countries. These provisions attempt to take the special needs from developing countries into account. They provide for fewer obligations of different rules. And the sixth are the key institutional and procedural rules relating to decision making and dispute settlement. The World Trade Organization is based on different sources. The principal source is the World Trade Organization Agreement. Also, the World Trade Organization dispute settlement reports, acts of World Trade Organization bodies, agreement concluded in the context of the World Trade Organization, customary international law, general principles of law, other international agreements, subsequent practice of World Trade Organization members, teachings of the most highly qualified publicists, and negotiating history. For the conclusion, I want to emphasize that it's extremely important to have rules in international treaties to regulate the transactions in a healthy way. Well, for many years, international trade law was not part of the mainstream of international law. The World Trade Organization is now the newer frontier of international law. Well, that is all from me. I hope you all have enjoyed the presentation and thanks so much for watching.